Wait till I get out and come back.
Okay, it's recording. So don't do anything.
Just out of curiosity.
Can we record you?
Ready? Sure. Evidently the Moodle wasn't up. I thought it had been opened. How many of you don't have a syllabus, copy of a syllabus? How many, let's go this way, how many do have a copy of the syllabus? You people all get A's.
It's actually up now.
Okay. I thought it was up last week. So I brought some extras along just in case we had some that didn't have it. We'll walk our way through this. What is not on there, and everybody needs this though, is the class schedule. So kind of run those back, pass them out all over the place. And for those of you that do need a syllabus, we'll run those back if we need more of them. Over your head. And while all of that stuff is going on, we have a lot of people now. You don't have a chair? Why don't you slide stuff?
People might be able to get short on chairs.
We got chairs.
Whatever works. So
Everybody got everything they need? Extras? Everybody's got a course outline and then the syllabus? What do you need? Syllabus. Any extra syllabi? There we go. Great. And everybody okay? Got two different things? Great. While you're taking a look at that, and we'll walk our way through that in just a second, let me just go through the class list real quick and start to put names and faces together. Got a big group in here, so just kind of bear with me here. Charlotte A. Askham?
Yes.
Okay. Stephen? There you are. Saw you when I came in. Yep. Stephanie? And help me out here. Got Rose? I should know that.
You should.
I should, because I know you. But say it again for me, so I... Rose, okay. Bay Rose. And I should know that. Carissa. Amber? Up there, we gotta raise a hand, we can't see that. Amber. Paul? Yes, sir? Here we go. Where have you been?
Sorry. I didn't expect your
Oh.
Sorry.
Yeah, just pull up a chair onto an end there. We got a seat right here. Take this one. Antoinette. Antoinette? No Antoinette? Anybody know her?
Yeah. She's usually
here.
Yeah, she's usually there.
This is not like that.
Okay.
Right, maybe.
This is wishful thinking. And Callie?
Kaylee.
Kaylee. Oops, we got two?
I'm a Kelly. I thought you said
Okay.
Kelly.
So, but it's Kaylee. Okay, we can do that. Let me get a long A in. Melissa. Pronounce your last name.
Ewer.
Okay. Say it again.
Ewer.
Okay. Samantha. Uh-oh. Let's go with Samantha
Oh,
Glasgow.
that's not me.
Then don't raise your hand. Elizabeth Getz. Go by Beth?
Nope, Elizabeth.
Okay, that's fine. It's your name, you ought to go by it, you know. Christina. And Meredith. You got the right room, Meredith. Lauren. There she is. Han. Okay. Leanna. Can you put your hand up any higher than that? Do it. Samantha L. There we go. Okay, so we have Samantha G and Samantha L.
You can call me Sam. That's fine.
Samantha.
I'll be the different Sam.
Okay. Alan. There he is. Joanne Mueller. Joanne. Anybody? Have you seen? I'm just teasing you. Have you seen the what is it? Peel and Keys?
Key and Peele.
Whatever those guys are. I saw it the other night where the guys in the substitute teacher in the class. It is so funny. You know, A.A. Rod. A.A. Rod for Aaron. It is so funny. Gosh, you got to watch that if you haven't seen that before. I was on the floor laughing. Anyway, but Johan, you going to be comfortable?
I'm great.
Okay. Kelly. There she is. Quit singing over there. Nina. And just say your last name for me.
It's Paganakis.
Okay. Greek? I got Greek blood in me too. Demetrios, yeah. Walona.
Alonda.
Walanda. There's an N there. I should know this. Walanda. Mandy. We only have one Mandy in the room? That's good. You're all by yourself. Here's another Stephanie, though. Stephanie Richmond. There she is. Caroline. Here. Jessica. We only have one Jessica? Okay, that's good too. Carly. Sackstutter. Anybody know Carly?
I think she thought she didn't have to take micro. She was trying to figure out if it transferred over.
Oh, okay, so we'll find out. That's fine. Jonah. Where's Jonah? There he is in the back. Ellen. Schetzer?
Yes. You're the
Okay.
first person to pronounce it
Yeah.
correctly.
We'll get there. Lisa. Uh-oh. Which Lisa are you? Okay. Allison. Sarah. Uh-oh. Slagle?
Yeah, that's me.
Okay. Then hold on, second Sarah. Rochelle. And Sarah. Chris Taylor. There he is. Nicole. Nikuk. Alyssa. Alyssa Walker. Anybody know Alyssa? Question mark. I know Mindy is not here. Mindy, you didn't make it, did you? She had called me. Emily, right there in front. Lisa Wolfrick. Did I pronounce that correctly? Sometimes people will take a simple name and, how do you pronounce your last name?
Wolford.
Okay, Wolfwork, okay. And last of all, Hannah. Hannah Wright. Okay, so enough of that stuff. Let's take a look at the syllabus here real quick. Work our way through that. This is general microbiology, sometimes called Introduction to Microbiology, but it's a general mic course. You notice on there that it's not microbiology for nursing. And the reason that it's not microbiology for nursing is that those courses generally don't transfer from one institution to another when there's specialized courses like that. So this is a course that, even though we get into medical microbiology, a fair amount of it, because that's typical of any course, it is not directed at nursing. So everybody's clear on that. I always get at the evaluations at the end of the semester, someone will always say, I wish you'd done more nursing stuff in there. I'm not doing that. I'm not a nurse, okay? So don't expect me to do that. And so there's the catalog description there at the top in terms of what we're covering, and we're kind of all over the place in here. And then there's the course description down there as well, which is in more detail. It really kind of tells you where we're headed with this particular course. And there's some things that are in there aside from basic knowledge of this, that, and whatsoever, is that I will assess you from time to time in terms of general education goals. And some of those gen ed goals are some critical thinking kind of stuff, and we'll get into that, and also your writing skills. Now, I won't grade you on those. I will grade you, but I won't use the grade as a grade. I'll talk more about that in lab when we talk about the paper that's due at the end of the semester and all of that. But I will grade your communication skills so that you know if you've got something that you need to work on, something out of that, along those lines. Come on down. We are out of chairs? Oh, one in the back, all the way in the back. And then if you take a look at the goals that are down there, course goals, is I would hope that you know at this point, are particular achievements you would like to have the student be able to do, you should be able to do by the end of the course, but I can't grade you on these. I can't grade you on your sense of awe, your appreciation. Those are things that you grasp as you move your way through this course or any other course. There are things that I can't assess you on, but you know whether or not you've achieved those. And so read those goals. They're on your own. I'm not going to read them to you. You're adults. But when we get down to the objectives, and these are relatively general at this point, there are only 9 of them there, this is what you'll be assessed on through the course. So if you look at that, then you get a pretty good idea in terms of what's expected of you at that point.
I need a bigger one.
Yeah, we may have to, I'll see if we may have to move across the hall. Pull up to the edge of a table there for the time being. Or we can use one of these tables. I don't need 2 of them. But that will work for right now. You'll be okay. And as we get into each section in the course, we'll talk more specifically about those particular types of objectives. The student learning activities, what's going on here. One of the major things is that we share at the beginning of every class. So it's kind of a show and tell type of a thing. And what I'd like for you to be able to do at that point is to begin to look at other sources other than what you normally do during the day, to look for your news. And I'll give you some sites in just a second, and to come in and tell me what you found. Or if you're already in a nursing situation and you have a situation that came up and you want to talk about it without sharing names or anything like that because of HIPAA rules, you may want to talk about some things like that. But whatever has come up that you want to share with the rest of the group, please do that. In fact, as long as we're yakking about that, if you look on the next page, you see where the websites are? And this is just a few. This is just a few of the many websites that are out there. Your text has got one. But if you have a used text or something like that, and maybe you didn't get the access to the website, you might not be able to use that, but it's a great one. But on the other hand, there's the CDC site, which is on there, which provides, and I'll refer to this with a fair amount of frequency, the MMR report, which refers to the morbidity and mortality weekly report that's out there. And there's an emerging infectious disease report that goes with that. Now, this is worldwide to a large extent, but if you focus just on the states, or even focus on Ohio and Kentucky or Indiana, you get a great amount of information there. There's the WHO site, the American Society of Microbiology site, the NIH. It's got great stuff on it, and it's easy to work your way through that. Believe it or not, the Food and Drug Administration has got a fun site, and yet with a lot of information. And when you get on that site and you work your way through, look for the Bad Bug book. And it just talks about kind of what types of infections are showing up, especially in the food industry and things like that. But that's a good one. Another fun one is a takeoff on NPR. Anybody listen to NPR, hopefully you start to do that National Public Radio as opposed to listening to the crap that you normally listen to. And you listen to some real news. And you start to do that kind of thing. There's a great little blog on there called Small Things Considered, to be as a takeoff on All Things Considered. Small, because this is microbiology. So that's a good one too. At the same time, I would hope to, for those of you that actually look like at the Enquirer, the Cincinnati Enquirer is a source of good information. It's a rag. And oftentimes the information there is half correct because they don't have a science team that writes, so the person who heads up the science team for the Enquirer has a minimum background in science. And the person is basically a writer, so oftentimes you get bad information from that, or half information from that. And even when they take articles, and it'll say New York Times, if you look at the original article in the Times, which may be 3 to 4 columns long, and you get 2 paragraphs out of the Enquirer, and it says it's from the New York Times, and you don't get the whole story either. So anybody work for them? Have parents work for them? Good. It's a rag. So hopefully by the end of this course you will have started to go to legitimate sources to read and get the information that you need. Okay. Lab stuff, I'm going to talk about that when we get into lab. We're not meeting in lab this week, everybody. Okay? You don't know anything yet.
I know a few things.
Okay, so you could bring a few things, but you're the exception out of all of this.
I'd say that's like biology.
Things in general, there you go. So anyway, don't show up this afternoon or don't show up tomorrow, okay? Everybody understands that too about lab is that there's one lab you're either scheduled for today or tomorrow. Because there's usually some confusion. People think they have to show up for both labs. No, you're either scheduled for today or tomorrow, but you will not meet this first week. What? What?
What about next week?
It's Martin Luther King Day.
Ouch. That's right. Tuesday lab will go ahead and meet next week. And Monday lab will do double makeup on the Monday. Okay? I'm glad you brought that up. But Tuesday lab next week will meet regularly. Okay. Methods of evaluation, you always need to know that. There are 4 exams. Each of those is worth 20% of your final grade. Your lab report, which shows up at the end of the semester, is worth the last 20% of the grade. And in lab, I will walk through that with you step by step and give you a list of competencies that you need to know, and we'll talk more about those. And you will meet those as you move through the semester, and the final paper just shows that you've been able to use all of those that you learned and done them correctly, and I'll talk more about that later on. So your lab grade is 20%, so that means that 5 times 20 is 100, so there you go. Attendance policy, you're adults, you make adult decisions. Correct? You make adult decisions as to whether or not you want to be here. I'm not going to track you down. I don't care. Okay? I've got the information to share with you. We've got a lot of stuff to talk about, but you make the decision as to whether or not you want to be here. If it comes time for exam, though, you be here. So I don't want to get the phone call that goes, well, I need another day to study. Okay? So be here unless you've been run over by a truck, something like that. And labs, again, we'll talk more about that, but I'll throw it out to you right now. You miss a lab and you've got cultures that you set up for that, then you come in the next week to lab and you're sitting there with nothing to do because you didn't set up your cultures. So if you miss lab, then you're really up Schitt's Creek. Okay? Yak. Phones. I have a tough time with people texting while I'm talking. It's rude. You know, it's rude. And I haven't broken anybody's phone yet, but I'm really tempted at times to see if I can take an iPhone and smash it off of that clock. So if you've got the addiction where you can't let go, I suggest that you leave the room, okay? As opposed to doing that or this. I know the routines. So anyway, don't do it. I'll draw you out on it, and we'll see if your behavior changes. Recommendations for success. Last 2 pages on here. This will work for any course there. So your personal academic performance results from the following. You got a shuffle of genes from your parents. Okay? You can't control that. You got them, and you're stuck with them for the rest of your life. So you have to kind of come to some type of an understanding that this is my intellectual capability. This is how far I can go. On the other hand, you've got to come up with some kind of a regimented study or a way of studying out of all of this, and you got to eliminate barriers. So what gets in your way, then don't do that anymore. So, as I said there, you got no control over number 1, but you can set the right goals, you can be persistent, you can be patient, you can be flexible, and you can be smart. And if you do all of those things, you will be successful, I guarantee. Doesn't mean that you're going to get A+. I don't care about that. The thing is that you will be successful. It means you will have passed the course and you have done just fine. And more than anything else out of all this thing, you need to lighten up, okay? It's a fun course, so come in here and expect to have a pretty good time out of all of this, and I'm not talking about that anymore. Okay, on the sheet. We got the exam dates on there. But as you see at the bottom, this schedule is subject to change at the whim of the instructor, and that's me. So if we find, for instance, that there's maybe way too much information coming up and you want to add, maybe you want to add an extra exam, or we want to move an exam, but it has to be with the consensus of the entire group, we can do that kind of thing. But basically, we're going to try to stick to that schedule as best we can. Gotcha? Okay, enough of that. Any questions about what's going on, where we're headed, any of that stuff? Good. So let's get going. Microbiology. It's considered to be a young science, and after we've done yakking today together here, I think you get some idea in terms of why we refer to it as a young science compared to like anatomy and physiology. If you looked at the first chapter in your A&P book, if you can remember that, whatever text you had, it doesn't make any difference. They were talking about historical stuff with A&P, and what time periods got thrown into that?
Millennium.
Yeah, virtually. And you go back to the Greeks and the Romans, and you're going back thousands of years. People were studying the human body and all of that. Well, we find that with microbiology, really, the majority of what we know about microbiology has occurred within the past 100 to 125 years, maybe 150 max, and even more of that within about the past 20 years. So it's a very young science compared to the others. So what do we deal with here? It's called microbiology because obviously we study things that are small, if not microscopic, very small. So what are we going to be talking about through this semester we're spending together? Don't use that word germ. Do not ever use the word germ in this class. Tell me why. You tell me why you're not going to use the word germ.
Being more specific.
Okay. If I were to say to you, because you just talked to me, that was a germinal thought. No, it's a good thought. Germinal implies what?
Something sprouts from it.
Yes, something from within, something that's growing from within. It's a good thing. If something is germinal, it means that, yes, you're working through it, and it's a positive. Wheat germ. You put it on your cereal this morning? And you put it on your cereal for the reason, what reason? Because it's got loads of nutrients. It's a part of the seed, the kernel of the seed, which supplies lots of nutrients. So the term germ has come to to mean something bad or evil or malignant or something like that. It is not a scientific term. We're not going to use that, and neither are you, ever, again, especially with your patients. You're never going to tell them they got a little germ. You're going to say you've got treponema pallidum, terminal syphilis, and you're going to die. You tell them exactly what's going on, but don't use the word germ. So what are we talking about here in this course then? Let's go back to that. Be more bacteria, somebody said. Okay.
Virus.
Yep. Put them over here. Keep going. Okay. The fungi.
Protozoa.
Protozoans. You use proper respiratory etiquette. Thank you very much. Keep going. Okay, yeasts are a type of fungi. Yep. All of these are parasites. I should say all of them are. They could be parasites. Some of these are non-parasitic. Anything else you want to throw out here? Okay, we don't know what those are yet.
So,
But I'll throw them up here since you said it. Archaea is short for archaeobacteria. We'll come and talk about those a little bit later on. Anything else we want to put up here, though?
Algae.
Okay. So let's put the algae up here. Anything else on this side with the viruses? I'm going to put one other thing over here, something called prions. And we can include some others, but we'll just keep it simple as that. And there's really one other group that I'd like to throw up on this side. Most of you were infested with them when you were probably 6 to 7, 8 years old. The helminthes, which are the worms. And some of you are still infested and don't know it. So, we're dealing with a diverse group of organisms. And you notice that we separated these from these. So it says something about, well, what are these then? And we're going to answer that question as we move through the course. So we've got this group over here that we've separated out for some reason. And we got this group over here, but you know, there's a huge difference between a bacterium and a fungi, and a protozoan and a bacterium, and an algae from. So what you're going to see as we move through the course is that there's not one kind of common thread that runs through all of these. The common thread is basically the fact that they tend to be small, and that's it. So in terms of relationships with one another, scientific genetic relationships, there are few. So kind of keep that in mind as we talk our way through this semester, that, boy, we're going to jump talking about these guys, and all of a sudden we're going to jump and talk about these guys. These are very different from those guys, et cetera, et cetera. Well, with all this that's going on, what have you heard in the news about kind of what's going on in the field of microbiology? Been a lot of stuff in the news lately.
A lot of antibiotic resistant
Oh, okay, exactly.
bugs.
So there's still an awful lot of talk about a large number of organisms, especially the bacteria, which are showing resistance to antimicrobials. And one of the major things that you probably heard in the last 2 months is that the British have been able to pretty much track back where MRSA came from, and that was where? Came from cattle feces. So you go, what's going on here? Well, more than half the antibiotics produced in the world go where? Into animal feed. And so they've tracked it back to say that the original source of that particular strain of bacteria, which now shows resistance to methicillin or oxacillin, which we call MRSA, was actually followed all the way back, trailed all the way back to a strain of cattle in Europe. So that's going on. What else have you heard? The flu, big time, big time. This hospital, we love it, don't we? It fills beds. We make money. Flu season. B North over the weekend. Anybody work at B North? In emergency by chance? Evidently, emergency was swamped with flu patients coming, or flu people with the flu coming into the emergency room over the weekend, and around the country. So it's showing up not just here, but kind of everywhere. What other disease showed up in Greater Cincinnati over the past 2 months? Pockets of it. Pneumonia is kind of always kind of with us, especially during these times too. But it was pertussis, whooping cough. So we had a large number of cases of that, more than normal again, and showing up. And as we move our way through the course, we'll talk about why that's the case, because aren't most people vaccinated for that? You would think, but not so. Anything else you've heard? Well, keep your eyes and ears open. Start to go to those websites. Start to listen to decent news and see what comes up out of all of this. So what I'd like to do for the rest of the day is this. We're going to talk a little bit about the history of microbiology, and let this be a turnoff for you. Another handout. Don't yawn in my class. Thank you. You're welcome. And while I'm not going to ask you to memorize specific dates, we'll talk about time periods, and we're going to look at 5 or 6 kind of major events that occurred in the history of microbiology. So if you've got your textbook, there's kind of an outline in there, but from another book I stole this, and that's the copy that I'm giving to you, because it includes some things that your author doesn't do. And Bauman's, it's a great textbook. It's a good book. Everybody got a copy of this? Extras? Everybody got one now? Excellent. So since we're talking about microbiology, a first event, and let's just right across the board. We'll start on this side and we'll move our way right across. Number one event. If you're going to study microbes, things that are exceptionally small, obviously you have to have what? Something to look at them with. So we come up with this idea of we need a tool to study the microbes. And of course that tool is the microscope. And the question is, well, how long have we had these things around, and what were people looking at when they developed the microscope? Well, if you look on your sheet there, look at 1590, 1660, and 1676. And you see some names on there. So you see a guy by the name of Zacharias Janssen, a Dutch spectacle maker. What does that mean? Make glasses. Okay. I had somebody like 2 semesters ago that he made a spectacle of himself. No. So he made glasses, and in order to make glasses, what must you do? You take glass and you grind it in such a way that it's going to curve the light to make up for the problem your eye has or cannot do out of all of that. So he invents something called the first compound microscope, which meant that it actually had 2 lenses in it as opposed to just 1. And while he's kind of important, it's the end of the 1500s. When you get into the 1600s, there are really 2 people that are very important. One is Hooke, and the other is von Leeuwenhoek. And both of these guys Janssen develops his little microscope, and it's kind of a cute little toy that he plays with, but he's not really looking at microbes. He's just being able to magnify things. But the idea was kind of there, and Hooke and von Leeuwenhoek start to make their own. And these are small little gizmos. There's a picture in your text. You know, you can hold the thing in your palm of your hand. They're both pretty simple devices where they've ground a glass bead into a lens. They put it on the end of a screw so they can, move it up and down to focus out of this. And they're looking through a little bitty hole and things that are coming back and forth. Very primitive, very primitive. But the thing is, with these two guys, is that what they saw was pretty incredible. Hooke looked at fungi along with a whole bunch of other things. He looked at blood cells and so on and so on. He was a trained scientist out of all of this, so he was starting to look at things that were small. And his drawings that he made of fungi that he saw are just incredible. They're gorgeous. And this is with this primitive little handheld thing that we started to call a microscope. He's a trained scientist. He submits what he sees to Royal Academies in London. They say, this is great stuff. This is interesting to see. Von Leeuwenhoek, on the other hand, is not a trained scientist. He's a linen merchant. But he's kind of inquisitive kind of guy. And he develops his little microscope to look at some things. And one of the things that he looks at is the cloth that he's selling. And what do you know if you go buy sheets? What do you look for? Thread count, exactly right. And so, you go into the store and it goes 500 thread count. Well, what does that mean?
Right.
But what does the 500 imply? It's within a given area, you've got 500 threads that run across this thing. Well, how do you know that? It says on the package. Yeah. What he was doing was saying, I can show you that you've got these thread counts because you can look through my little microscope and you can actually count them if you want for me to prove to you that the linens and the things that I'm selling are top quality. So he was using it as a means of selling a product. But then he started to look at all kinds of things. So he starts to look at the water in his rain barrel. He looks at the scrapings of his teeth. He's looking at this, that, everything you can think of. He looks at his own semen. Whoa. Because in his semen, he sees things swimming around. And he drew what he saw, and he described what he saw, and he sent those things again to this group of scientists we call the Royal Academy in London. But they're kind of going, this guy's not a scientist. He's not trained as one. So should we accept his stuff or not? And they kept trying to go visit him and said, show us your microscopes that you're seeing this stuff with. And he wouldn't show them. He was so eccentric. So some of the stuff that he saw and drew and described were absolutely right on, but they weren't accepted at the time because he didn't follow the rules. But he still submitted this stuff. Well, how did he explain that? First of all, they said, where did you get the semen? And the letter that he wrote back to the Academy is really kind of interesting, and all this, you can Google all this stuff up. He said basically that he was blessed with copious quantities of semen, and after he had been conjugal with his wife, this was left over. But the point was, what are those? What are those? So this is 16 something, right? And for the first time, we're seeing sperm. And then they said, okay, we keep seeing this over and over again. What are those things? And then if you look back and even I think your A&P book has got this stuff, you look in there and what you see is there's a little guy in there. It shows this little guy inside there with eyes and a smile. And they said, well, that's what those are. Those are just little men and women in there that need to be put in a proper home, i.e. the womb, and they will grow up to be adults. It took a couple of hundred years before we realized really what this was, because it took a couple of hundred years to find that there was something called an egg. That shows up later on. The point of it all is that what is beginning to happen with all of this? Von Leeuwenhoek is seeing things, Hook are seeing things. In fact, von Leeuwenhoek goes even a little bit farther to look at his cheek scrapings and his tongue gum scrapings and all of that kind of stuff. And he says there are these little things that keep appearing over and over and over again. And some of them are round, and some of them are rod-shaped, and some of them are curved. So they keep finding these. Anywhere I look, I find these things. And of course, what he was looking at were bacteria, cockle forms, and bacillar forms, and curved forms. So, you know, we get into lab next week or the week after that, and one of the things you're going to see out of all of this is that I'm going to ask you to find some bacteria, and you're going to have a tough time with a very expensive microscope. And he's using this little handheld thing. He's capable of seeing these things. He saw these protozoans from his rain barrel. Interestingly enough, he said these things move. They're swimming all over the place in there. And I look at them and they even divide. I see them splitting and giving rise to new ones. And what he was looking at were what? Protozoans. He was looking at protozoans, which he called animalcules, little animals. Well, it goes on and on and on. Discovery after discovery after discovery, submitted for evaluation. And again, the Royal Academy in London, there was a place in Paris that did the same thing. They're all kind of trying to make some sense out of this stuff. But what does it do, basically? At the time, it says there's a whole other world we haven't seen before. And what do we make of this? And one of the things that bothered them a lot, the people who are looking at this information that Hook, and now even others that don't appear on your sheet, there are lots of others that kind of get on the bandwagon with all this, is that this idea that these things then divide. Because how did one describe new life at that time? How did you describe, the fact that there, all of a sudden there was a baby, or that let's say that you're out there, your dog needed a bath, was rolling around in, as dogs do, in cow feces out in the pasture, and comes in and you give him a bath and you comb his hair out and the hair's lying all over the place. It pours down rain overnight. You come out, there are earthworms there, and you go, whoa, the hair turned into earthworms. What was going on?
To spontaneous generation?
Yeah, this whole concept then of how does new life come about? Well, it was always thought that these are constant creations. New life is constantly being created by God, and very specifically, this rock is going to turn into that turtle. This hair is going to turn into that worm. All of these things, and that God has this constant job of creating life from things that are not living. And that concept, and I'm not bashing, hold on here, okay? I'm just trying to explain to you how, at the time, how things were explained. So I'm not church bashing or any of that kind of stuff. Don't go off on that tangent. The term that was used is spontaneous generation. So let's put this up here as number 2. How do we deal with this concept of, who's yawning? Spontaneous generation. Anybody know what another name for this is? Abiogenesis. A as a prefix always means what? Without. So acellular, no cells, etc. Abiogenesis. Bio, we know, life. And genesis is? Beginning of life. So without what? Things living to begin with is really what it says. It implies that things that are not living can be turned into things that are living. And it was a way of explaining things, and it worked, right? Because no one had ever seen this stuff before. We had no concept of egg and sperm. We had no concept of the idea that mitosis occurs. We had no concept of the fact that we're made up of individual cells, trillions and trillions of them, and all of that kind of stuff. None of that was there before. So this was a very valid way of saying, this is how we know life comes about. It's constantly being created or generated. Well, with these new microscopists coming in, and especially starting with von Leeuwenhoek, looking at protozoans that divided under his, he's looking, he sees them divide, and all of that. The question was raised then, what do we do with this? So we have a whole group then that says, I'm not going to buy into this A stuff. Biogenesis, we're seeing more and more examples of it, implies that life comes from life. That life gives rise to more life all the time, which is something that we all know, we simply accept as what? Truth. You okay?
Yeah.
You're gonna blow your brains out if you keep pinching your nose like that. They come right out your ears, and it's messy for the people sitting to the right line. But the problem with this is that who supported spontaneous generation and the abiogenesis thing was the church at the time. And at this particular point in time, it doesn't make any difference that this is post-Reformation. What's he talking about?
Martin Luther.
Yeah, we're talking about Luther and the whole Protestant Reformation that comes out of this. So even they bought into this. We're talking about the church in total, the Christian church at the time. But if you go back even into Eastern religions, you see the same scenario. There is some kind of mystical force that's out there, a vital force which changes things, inanimate things, non-living into living things. But this is a real affront to the church, saying we know that God is all-powerful and God can do this and God does do this. So if you're going to come and say life comes from life, this posed a major problem. And it started at that point a major fraction and major friction between science and the church, which exists to this day. So the question then is, how do we get around that? How does one explain in a scientific way that's understood by all that abiogenesis doesn't occur and that there really is a biogenesis? Life gives rise to life. Anybody know? Let's talk about Pasteur. So now let's jump, look at your sheet again. We're going to jump around a little bit here. Look down to 1857. Now, 1857 is how many years ago? 150 plus years, okay? 150 plus years, that's not that long ago. When you think about it, and in terms of millennia, it's not a long period of time. So there's this guy by the name of Pasteur. And you notice there he's included twice, in 1857 and again in 1861. And again in 1881. Thank you very much. My course. Never correct the instructor. So what does it say in 1857? He's got something to do with fermentation and all of that. So what's going on here? Well, let's talk a little bit about that and then build on this. I'll put a plastic bag over your head. You do that. I know it's threatening in there. The wine industry in France. Okay, so Louis Pasteur, obviously French. The wine industry in France, which is a huge economic import, huge, and still is, correct? Right? French wines, all that stuff that goes with that. They're having a problem though with their wines changing into very high quality vinegar. So, you buy good quality wine vinegar. That's what it is. It's something that's happened to the wine that allows it to go from grape juice into wine into vinegar. And obviously, if you're selling wine to be imbibed at the table with your meal, you don't want it to be vinegar. You cook with that. So they were having a problem with many bottles of wine going bad and turning into very high quality vinegar, which they couldn't sell. So they thought it was simply a chemical reaction that was going on, the vintners of the time. And so they went to Louis Pasteur, who was a chemist, and they went to Louis and said, find out chemically what's going on here. Tell us what's happening out of this process. And give us some kind of chemistry to help us not let this happen. So Louis Pasteur, who's a chemist, doesn't know squat from apple butter about microbes and this kind of stuff, gets involved, and lo and behold, what he finds is that the whole concept of changing, first of all, grape juice into wine isn't just a chemical reaction that occurs while it's sitting around. It has to have yeasts involved. And so all of a sudden now he's beginning to move from chemist into microbiology. So he's now looking at these little fungi that we call yeast that have to be in the grape juice in order for it to be converted into wine. And he comes up with the conclusion that what's going on? These organisms are actually changing the sugar into alcohol. And okay, this is 150 years ago. People are going, really? And he proves it over and over and over again. These microbes are the ones that are doing the process. And we come up with this term, fermentation. So now we start to use some different terminology. Fermentation. We've got fungi, little yeast in there that are converting that. But then why is the alcohol, the ethyl alcohol, in this very high quality wine now being converted into acetic acid vinegar? And the more he studies, he finds out that if you've got certain bacteria present in the wine, those bacteria, even though it's corked and all of that, convert the ethanol into acetic acid. And he referred to it as the disease of the wine. What are we starting to think now? Disease then associated with a microbe. Even though he called it the disease of the wine, we're starting to equate what? Organism with disease. It's really the first time people are starting to put that together and make some sense out of it. People had suggested before that this was the scenario, but now Pasteur is saying this is what's going on. So what he does is studies and studies and studies. He comes up with a mechanism by which then he can get rid of the bacteria without removing the ethanol, which everybody wants. And he says, let's just heat the wine up a little bit. We can't boil it because the alcohol goes off. We don't want that. But if we heat it up just enough to kill off the bacteria, then we save the wine. We come up with this process that we now refer to as pasteurization. A couple things. One, what's happened here? We're starting to associate organism with disease. And I'm not done with this yet. And once he gets this in his head, in fact, let me put 3 up here right now. This was 2. Somebody sneezing? The germ theory of disease. Now I'm going to come to that in a second, but we're starting to get hints of that this is going on. But going back to the spontaneous generation, once Pasteur now kind of understands the role of the microbes, he then kind of spends all the rest of his days dealing with microbiology, and he says, I want to debunk this idea that spontaneous generation occurs. And what method we learned about this in the 4th grade. Everybody learns about this in science class in the 4th or 5th grade. If you don't remember, you weren't paying attention. What did he do?
Broth.
What was the unique tool that he used to debunk, to say spontaneous generation, abiogenesis does not happen?
Swan neck.
Yes, he used these unique little flasks. So if we start with this, we got a flask here, and he puts media in it. Media, by media we mean something that's going to allow for bacteria, microbes to grow on it. We call that media, microbiological media. And in this particular case, he had a kind of broth in here. And if he left the system open, what happened? He started off with sterile broth, media, he left it open for a couple of days, what would you expect occurred?
Kind of cloudy.
Yeah, it became bacterized, and there was loads of fungi in there. And he said, I can explain that because those bugs fall out of the air. They fall into that because they're everywhere out of all of that. Well, people said, okay, that's interesting, but you haven't proven anything. So then he said, okay, let's do this. Bless you. I'm going to go to my glass blower. I'm going to have him bend the neck on my flask. And I'm simplifying the whole process here, but you get the gist. And in turn, as long as I bend this neck like this and leave it open, the system open, it doesn't bacterize because the organisms that fall out of the air get trapped here, they can't make their way in, and so on and so on. So he said, and the system is still open, it's not like I'm keeping any vital spirits or forces out of this thing, that it doesn't bacterize in this case. I simply kept the microbes from having access to my media. And again, it was a longer process than this, but for the sake of immediacy here, what I'm trying to get at is that it's believed that he pretty much proved that spontaneous generation doesn't occur because there were no bugs growing in here. And the only reason that there were no bugs, meaning bacteria or fungi, was because of the fact that he kept them from reaching the media, but it was an open system, right? There's no plugs on here or anything like that. It was an open system. It's oftentimes referred to as what? The swan neck flask experiment. And theoretically what that did was say, no more of this talk. The only time we're going to get organisms present is if they come from other organisms. And they could have made their way in here if they wanted to. No, I should say that. This could have been generated into a teeming broth of bacteria if creative force wanted to do that, vital spirits wanted to do that, but it didn't happen. Simply because the mechanical nature of the flask kept the organisms from getting in there. Okay, get up, walk around for 15 minutes and come back here, okay? Let's break it. Let's go for 15, okay? We won't go the whole time today, but you need to get up and move around.
Not locked in. I keep moving it. I tried to lock it when I sat down, and I guess well, I didn't want to touch that. Are you every day?
I think I got 4 numbers. Hispanic family. Yeah. I did the math thing. I did that before orientation. I'm gonna finish. I'll go. He'll stay here. He'll go to the library and finish. I guess I'll go and feed the meat. Oh yeah.
Maybe they'll bring in like another.
Like I'll wake up the next morning and she sent me these emails like, you have one missing. He's finding that. It's like, where's new pair of shoes, super early.
So I went to get a burger. And like I literally drove and went on to every floor. And then my mom works on spring break. Then she like texted me right over. And I usually like I feel like it's really good. Like I like the second. And usually like back then I was it wasn't at all. I was like, way back and I just like and people were like people that want to turn right instead of left and stuff. There's that turn by and I just it took me like
oh really? Yeah, she's a big old lot.
But it's not very structured at all.
I ordered that. Why would you just order that?
I ordered on Amazon. It was $75. I ordered it with cheap. I bought it.
We're almost done.
I know, I kind of want to.
First copy.
That's why I told you, it didn't change. Nope. That's the nice thing about it.
And then like I changed my after that.
And then I add to it, but it never really changed.
Would you like to get pounds? Yeah, mine doesn't live here. Exactly. I let mine out. She doesn't really go too far out. I heard she would go to her side. He always does that for boyfriend. That's why I let mine run around myself. Do you use your paper that one's like supposed to?
No, I've worked in since I was 17. I just like graduated and I graduated in December because I wanted to get married. Hindsight, he wasn't born in
I look at pictures of him when I'm not with him.
But we might have to call it Monday full time. I worked at CBS at the time. So I was now I work at PBS. Which that's my salary from yeah. I'm so thankful I work there and not so deep into the medical side. Like right now, they're only having hours overtime.
Yeah, she works overtime.
Yeah. Specialties like that is really bad.
Yeah, I had an overnight when I
She's just nice and she went
Well, and it's nice to not be in retail. I mean, for her, it's I mean, in retail, I'd be working.
I ordered it like
Well, my schedule's all messed up now because I'm like 40 hours in school, so I'm there until like 8. But prior to school, I was 8 to 4:30. I was busy Friday.
I got it like 8 to 4.
I think as much as I like it there, management is really benefits. You get time off, insurance, I think I'm probably going to try to Great. So you probably still, yeah, say you probably still live at home.
Yeah, I get everything on Friday. Don't have to pay for anything yet.
Enjoy it. Soak it up like a sponge. Don't be ungrateful, but soak it up like a sponge.
Yeah. I'm like, Mom, you can keep paying for my phone.
outline exactly.
I mean, one of the girls that I sat next to orientation, I was like, yeah, I waited till it would be easier, you know. I have a 2-year-old and a house and a husband. It's just easier. I waited till it was easier. But recently we got out of pharmacies because at CVS, I'd been there so long. I was already making money. I mean, I had this biology degree, so I was making lab rats and science. And everything's like, and then wait just what and I had no desire to ever. I work so much and
No, I did. That's good. You like doing it?
would you do it?
I love that.
Oh, yeah. Cheddar maybe, kind of like well cheddar type.
Everybody's like, I'll make you stay, break, whatever. And you know, like, here, you don't want to break.
That's who I work with now. I do specialty pharmacy. We do like a lot of thing and medications. A lot of cancer patients. Laid out. A lot of the immune deficiency patients. They're not always the easiest to talk to.
I always like if like most of the time you get more but like when you get to the hospital, sometimes they like they tell you a story, you're just like, say we all draw some friends because we'll be together for a long time.
I'll start, I guess, nursing home. I emailed her because I made my nasty, like, like, in perspective to her. About how many people would have to say no. Like, there's 9 people in front of me. I know, one friend that came in said he was one of them. Well, I applied together with them back in 2012, but I was on a project that was supposed to run and ended up taking my month. And I had already committed to the project. Oh, well, I'm going to be here. So I actually applied to start. You're in advance. People were at am I even attending this? Yeah. And all of a sudden you'd be like, oh my god, I have so much to do.
It's like, oh my god, there's things in a checklist.
Did we have to turn in another vehicle registration and insurance? Yeah, I can try to go again. I have another. Well, we got an email, like they were orientation. You guys turn in. I mean, they don't have it. Probably so. That's what happened. Yeah. Some people say like, well, I can turn it in to get it. It looks like it's the same way in your house. So I was just waiting. I guess I need to do that. I gotta go. That's what I told my husband. I was like, it was a I read summaries on I read the first like 35 pages. And then you realize so like my brother had like he's been to like 3 different I just got mine on a Kindle edition. Well, but that just seems like a good idea. Oh my god, I sat there and I was like, and apparently when I walked out, they talked about this. It's like they had to get right. Well, I mean, it was. I felt like it was going to go so slow, and it was great. Yeah, 9 pounds, 8 ounces. I didn't even want to go though. Like when I was but this is the first place I got it. I went to it was a 2-day
Okay, who did I not, those of you that came in late real quick, just so I get their names down, help me out. You are, I'm sorry. Gotcha. Anybody else that slipped in? Okay, good. Where is she? Oh, yeah. You're here.
Remember we said
You're here.
oh.
Oh.
I've been here a little while.
But then she was here.
You missed the sign in. But I got you down now, but you're here. I was just thinking, that we were talking about young science and all that stuff. I was putting my feet up there at my desk for a couple of minutes. And it was something I had realized over the past couple of weeks. Anybody read The Immortal Life of...
Henrietta Lacks?
Exactly. Talk about how young some sciences are. How many chromosomes do we have in our outside of our gonads? Typical cells, we have how many? 46, 23 pairs. How long have we known that?
But in science, not long at all.
30, 40 years.
We didn't determine that they were thought that we had 48 until 1953 through the use of her cells, when one of the researchers made a mistake in terms of staining the cells, used improper method, and all of a sudden, boing, there was a karyotype. You know, there were all the chromosomes out there. Counted them, there weren't 48, there were 46. So that was 1953, 54. So some things in science, we just think everybody knew this forever. Well, what you find out is that that's not always the case.
Why did they think there were 48?
Because you didn't have a good way of staining those cells, those chromosomes, and separating them out. And the way God bless you, the way they always kind of laid themselves out, led researchers to think that there were 48 here because they couldn't count well. Everything was always kind of muddled. So anyway.
The other great apes have 48, right? The other great apes have 48?
I'm not sure if that's true of all the simians, the primates. I'm not sure. That's a good question. And I wonder if maybe that was why they just assumed as well. That could very well be true. Yeah, yeah, exactly. That's a great point. Find an answer to that one. Okay, getting back into this discussion here then. Where we left off was working on kind of what? Third major something that happened in the field of microbiology, the science of microbiology, and the history of microbiology. And if you take a look at your handout, let's look at another name on here. And go to, and I'm not going to do all of these, right? We're just picking a couple of these out. Let's do 1853. 1853, everybody there? A guy by the name of Snow, John Snow. And there was a best-selling book 5-6 years ago, maybe a little bit more than that, referred to as the Ghost Map. It's on the New York Times bestseller list. Anybody read that one? It's in your local library. But it dealt with an outbreak, and what does it say here about Snow? Cholera in London. And what I want you to keep in mind here is that what time period have we got? 1839. So this is before Pasteur and another fellow by the name of Koch we're going to come up with in just a second here. But Snow, so we don't know that bacteria cause disease yet, is the point. We don't know that. And we don't even know that that these bacteria are in the water supply, but we do know, Snow knows, that people are dying from this disease that got the name cholera, which is referred to as cholera, and you die of just severe diarrhea, and you can guess what goes with that is what? Electrolyte imbalance and dehydration. And people are dying. And as Snow starts to kind of make some sense out of all of this, he starts to put pins in a map of London where people died. And pretty soon he's got this map, and it kind of is a round one, and at the very middle is this well. And as the story goes, and sometimes stories get embellished with time, you know, we all kind of do that with our own. We just add a little bit more every time, and pretty soon it becomes a huge story. The word is that Snow, thinking that there was something in the water, couldn't explain it, but he thought there must be something in the water because everybody's using this well with this pump on it. And so the story goes, he took the pump handle off People didn't use the well anymore as their source of water because there was no indoor plumbing at that point, and deaths dropped off. Well, what it was found shortly after that is that this cistern, which was a water collecting thing, that the well that was there that people were using to cook with and to drink with and all of that stuff, virtually lined with brick, and the brick was shared with the sewer system. So there was seepage from the sewer system into the well because there was not, it was very porous kind of interface between the two of those. Snow said there's something going on here, there's something in the water, but he couldn't explain what it was. So that gets us into then this germ theory of disease. And we're going to look at Pasteur again. We've already done him. But look at one other guy, and that other guy is going to be, look at 1876. And you see a guy by the name of Koch. With me? And Koch, who's doing work, he's obviously German, and Pasteur is French. So a lot of this microbiology, this early microbiology thing that starts to get off with these two guys is in Western Europe here at this point. And Koch is looking at this disease called anthrax, which is hoof and mouth disease. Not to be confused with hand, foot, and mouth, or foot and mouth, but hoof and mouth disease. And Pasteur is doing the same thing. So they're both looking at this disease, and you say, well, why are they looking at anthrax or hoof and mouth disease? Well, it would devastate, a farmer if he lost all his animals. And what did you say? I missed that.
Did it have to do with the size of the anthrax? Isn't that larger than others?
Hold on to that thought. Hold on. Okay. The point is that you've got a farm and you've got cows that you're going to be milking for milk that you're going to sell to keep your family alive and keep food on the table, or for beef or whatever it happens to be, and it could be goats, it could be anything like that. These animals come down with this disease, which causes their hoofs to rot so they can't walk anymore and they fall over, and their throat swells up so they can't swallow anymore, hence the term hoof and mouth, and you lose your herd. And then you've lost your livelihood and you can't feed your family. So it was a major problem that kind of went through Europe over and over and over again, much like the plague. And when the plague came through, centuries before that, how'd you explain the plague? Killed off? Yeah. Why? The plague killed off maybe a third, some people say even more than that, of the population of Northern Africa, Western Europe, and even went as far as Asia, came through in kind of storms, and then there'd be a lull, and then they'd come through again. Well, how did you explain the plague, the Black Plague, the bubonic plague? If you got it, it's because you had sinned, right? And you were going to get it from God because you had done something really awful. God awful, as it were. And so the thought was, again, if you lost your herd, yeah, what have you done? You've done something wrong, and you're being punished for this. So Koch, working in Germany, Pasteur, working in France, both looking at this and determined that what is the cause of this disease is actually a bacterium. They both discovered the same organism. They called it different names, but they came up with the same organism. The important thing is they found a bacteria that could be specifically associated with a disease. Now, what's the time period? In the 1860s and 1870s, this is going on. That's 100 and a couple of years ago. So for the first time, we now associate an organism, microbe, with a disease. And you can understand why a whole bunch of people went, that's crap. I've never seen those things you're talking about. The layperson goes, still has no clue that these microbes exist, no clue at all. And you're still, what happened with the AIDS epidemic? So 1980, it blossoms all over the world. And immediately, those men who came down with AIDS and died, what was the explanation? your lifestyle, right? You're being cursed for your lifestyle. So it shows you that 120 years, and we still don't look at the germ theory of disease. We look at somehow there's this intervention by some kind of a vital spirit that says, I'm out to get you. And you step over the line and I will get you out of all of this. So the point of it is that this kind of sets into motion the whole idea of now we've got all these diseases. Let's find out the microbes that cause them. So Koch went on to discover the bacillus that cause tuberculosis. Pasteur went on to discover a whole bunch of other organisms. And it set off this kind of incredible kind of domino effect to try and say, let's find the bug that causes this disease. And they had great luck. And this really starts at about that time, and really about 1850, when Pasteur first does the disease of wine and moves on from there. We call that the golden age of microbiology. The golden age, because virtually hundreds of organisms were discovered and were associated with specific diseases. Now with that, obviously, if you're discovering the organism, what else must you be doing in the laboratory? You've got to, come up with better microscopes to study them. You've got to come up with better food, we call that media, to grow them on. You've got to come up with techniques for staining them so we can see them. All of this kind of stuff is going on. And most of it occurred in Koch's laboratory in Germany. It was a huge kind of, the Gram stain procedure came out of his lab. Loads of other stains came out of his lab. Procedures, media, it goes on and on and on. So while we're starting to associate organism with disease, germ theory of disease, and I told you not to use the term germ, and I just did, because it's kind of a historical term to be used at this point. An awful lot of this is going on, and the golden age of microbiology kind of abruptly stops in 1912. Late 1912, kind of into 1913. World War I. And the whole world did what? Kind of change their whole way of doing things and thinking into this war effort. And science fell off the table for about 10 years, 10, 15 years, and it took a long time to catch up again. So this whole idea of associating organism with disease and how do we grow them, how do we study them, how do we stain them, all of that kind of stuff went through that golden age of microbiology, which went from approximately 1850, 70, 57, whatever it was when Pasteur did his thing, to about 1912. And of course then it picks up again, but that was a time when, gosh, it was great to be a microbiologist. Okay, can you think of organisms relatively recently that we've associated with disease? Because we're still looking, right? And I'll throw something else out while you're thinking about that, is that, and we'll come back to this later on in the course, is while they were just taking disease after disease after disease, there were certain diseases they couldn't find the causative agent for. Measles, mumps, rubella, herpes. They couldn't find the bacteria. Why? Because they were viruses. They weren't even bacteria. And there are no means of studying those at that particular point in time. So that comes much later out of all of this. But can you think of any relatively new bacteria that have been associated with disease? I think one of the newest ones that still has an impact on us today is the organism that causes Legionella, Legionnaire's disease, which wasn't discovered until about 1980 as well, something like that. So they're still out there. There's still diseases and there's still organisms we have to equate them, the bug with. Okay, so we got that out of the way. Well, this is a logical step. Think about this for just a second. So now we've found a way to look at these organisms. We have kind of debunked this whole idea that all these bugs are created anew and that you get these organisms that cause disease if you sinned, and that organisms really give rise to other organisms, and some of them happen to be pathogenic and cause disease. What would be the next logical step if you were a scientist or someone involved in medicine? If we've got this disease, let's cure it. Okay? Or let's keep these bugs out of you and all of that. So let's take a look at another name. Gosh, this is exciting. Look, 1847. This is a sad story. So get out the puffs. So 1847, 1850. So it's prior to what?
Golden age.
Golden Age and the germ theory of disease. Even though people were speculating, they were thinking this stuff. Could this work? So, but here comes Ignaz. And he's got a great name. But Ignaz, and this is a true story. And actually, there's a C-grade film that shows up every once in a while on, like at 4 o'clock on Saturday mornings, on American Movie Classic or whatever it is. You'll see it, the story of Ignaz. But he is a physician in Hungary, and what he notices is in birthing arenas. And what's a birthing arena? If you were going to deliver, where'd you go? You showed up at a birthing hospital. They stuck you in a room with, 13 other screaming women, and you kind of roll the beds into a circle, Pilgrim, and the midwife was doing what? Going from
Catching everybody.
and there were sometimes some doctors there, and what he noticed was that oftentimes something called childbirth fever would occur, and the kid would get sick, but the mother would get sick too. Usually the mother came down with this childbirth fever thing, and oftentimes they died. And what he found was he simply observed was that if there was this midwife, those women tend to come down with infections, or this doctor, those women came down with infections. So he thought, what's going on here? Why don't we try this? He thought maybe there was dirt of some kind on their hands. He said, let's wash our hands between patients. And he recommended using a little lime water because that was kind of astringent at the time. And so he suggested that. What happened to Ignaz?
Ridiculed.
He was ridiculed to the point where he ended up dying in an insane asylum because they virtually drummed him out of the whole physician's corps and laid at him over and over again, because the theory was doctors never cause disease because we've taken the Hippocratic Oath and we do not cause disease, we cure. So for you to suggest to me that I'm killing my patients is anathema. And they wouldn't let him alone. So it's a sad story. He died in an insane asylum. They drove him nuts. But the point was, what did he see? If you did wash your hands, there was no disease. There was no childbirth fever that occurred. So we got that kind of going on. Who else can we throw out here at this point? Let's not do them. But let's go down to 1867. And there is Joseph Lister. And what does Lister notice? Well, let's talk a brief story here. These are great stories. So Lister is a great surgeon. Great surgeon. His surgical procedures are wonderful. They usually cure the problem, whatever it happened to be, but he always had a problem then with post-surgical infection. Right? And he'd lose his patients. Surgery was great, but the patient would die from an infection later on. Well, we're at a point now where we've already done what? Associated organism with disease. And what Lister says is, let's try to come up with something that we know will kill these bacteria off, so that when I create a portal of entry, with my scalpel, I'm not letting these bugs get inside. They're going to cause infection. Makes sense, correct? So he recommends the use of something called phenol, carbolic acid or phenol. And what he does with this stuff is, and you have to keep in mind that these were surgical arenas, much like they were birthing arenas. So you could come in off the street and sit in the chair, in the seats up above, and look down at a surgery going on. And they'd have people coming and going all the time. So anybody coming in and they're coughing, hacking away up there, blowing their nose, snapping their hanky to get another snot out of it, and all this kind of stuff was going on. So it was anything but sterile in the environment. But he says, let's take some atomizers with phenol and spray them around here. I'm going to wash my sponges and my cloths in this stuff. I'm going to wash down the patient's skin with this stuff, and so on and so on. And what he found was that his infection rate dropped off the table. Boom. What are we into the process then that we still call today? It's called antisepsis. Antisepsis. And it was accepted rather quickly. The problem was that phenol, carbolic acid, what do you know about that? It smells, it's got a unique odor to it, but it also is readily absorbed through the skin and will destroy your liver, which is what killed him. So when we started to realize that this stuff maybe isn't the best to use, but a patient is only exposed for a short period of time, so it didn't cause them any problems, but he was awash with the stuff all day long while he was in surgery. So it's understandable why he came down with this devastating type of an effect of the chemical itself. So when they realized that the chemical was not the best to use, started moving into other things and other things. But we get into that whole process then of antisepsis. And what was the goal? Reduce infection. That's all it was. Reduce infection. So now we see that bugs can cause disease. We know they do that. If you have to create a portal of entry, you can reduce infection rate by antisepsis. Well, what happens if the bug does get in you? What's the next logical thing we have to deal with? How do we kill off the bug that's in you, causing the infection? What do we call that process? Let's look at a couple of people here and see if we can come up with an answer to that. Let's go back to, or up to, not back to. I'll go back in just a second. No, let's not do him. Let's not do him. Let's go with, flip the page. Let's go 1908. Boy, that's a big jump. We'll drop a couple of names off the picture here. But this guy by the name of Ehrlich, Paul Ehrlich. German fellow, obviously. He becomes the pioneer for what's referred to as modern chemotherapy. So this was number 4. Number 5 then is chemotherapy. Now the sad thing is that when you hear the word chemotherapy today, what's first thing comes to mind? Cancer. And that's only one aspect of chemotherapy. Chemotherapy simply means we're going to treat you with some kind of chemical. We don't care what you got. Doesn't have to be cancer. We're going to treat you to try to get rid of what's ever causing the problem, the germ causing the disease. But in terms of doing that, what is the ultimate goal? We want to use what? Some kind of chemical. We're going to put it in you or on you, but we don't want it to do what?
Kill you.
Harm you. So we want it to be selective against the organisms that's causing the disease. We don't want it to kill off your cells. So where Ehrlich was working with patients who had syphilis. Anybody got that? Nobody ever raises their hand. Nobody ever does. And he went through virtually hundreds of different types of chemicals, trying to find one that was the magic bullet. The one that would go into the body, not harm any of your cells, go right to the bug that was causing the disease, kill that, or at least keep it from reproducing so the disease wouldn't, or just keep moving through the body. And he finally came up with an arsenic-based compound. He called it salvarsan. And when you think of arsenic, you think of something which is very poisonous. But what he came up with was a type of arsenic, organic-based arsenic, which had minimum effects on human cells, but was quite detrimental to the treponeme, the little bacterium that caused syphilis. So he kind of got the whole ball going with this idea of coming up with some method of chemotherapy. Well, that started people thinking, and people started to do some research. We go through World War II right after this, or World War I, excuse me, and of course then everything kind of slows down and stops. And then as we start to come back into the 1920s, look whose name shows up. You'll recognize the name. Let's not do that. 1929. Alexander Fleming. And as soon as you hear Alexander Fleming, you think of what? Penicillin. Peggy Fleming was the skater. Alexander was the microbiologist. I don't like this guy for a couple of reasons, one of which he was a crap microbiologist. And he was working in his laboratory with Staphylococcus aureus. Bless you. Staphylococcus aureus, the disease that we associate with all kinds of disease, or the organism with all kinds of diseases today. The SA from MRSA, Staphylococcus aureus. And he's got this terrible habit, which you will never use in the laboratory, of taking the lid off his petri dish and observing. And he kept getting them contaminated. Go figure. You take the lid off, you got to expect stuff to show up on there that's falling out of your nose and out of your hair, out of the air. It's going to happen. So he keeps getting his plates contaminated, and he keeps getting them contaminated with a guy up above him who's working with penicillin, fungi. They both keep their windows open, and you notice why we don't open them in the lab. Windows stay shut. He's got his window open. The guy up above's got his window open. The spores from the penicillin are blowing out that window, blowing in this window, and he's getting irritated because his cultures keep getting contaminated. And what's worse is it kills off his Staphylococcus aureus that he's working with. And he's pissed. And he's going, what are we going to do here? And it really took some of his colleagues to say, I think you got something here. And he's still looking at this as an irritation. But they suggest to him that let's do some studies with this. This is killing off this infectious bacterium. So he kind of begrudgingly goes, okay, and he publishes his paper, puts his name on it only, and starts to get accolades. But what we don't have yet is what? God bless you.
I don't know what's happening.
Okay, you're allergic to somebody in this room.
It's the brown.
Okay, it's your neighbor.
It's not me.
So to shorten up a long story, what happens here is this. He starts to go out on the lecture circuit, and he's talking about the fact that whatever's in this penicillin is getting off the cells. Maybe we could do something with this. But there are two guys that work with him. Look at the sheet again, and you'll see their names show up somewhere. Down in 1941, Flory and Chain. See this, guys? 1941. They were working in his lab. Those are the guys, and along with a couple of others, who actually extracted the chemical from the fungi that we now call penicillin and made it available for human use. And yet Fleming still went on the lecture circuit, got a Nobel Prize for the discovery, but didn't do a majority of the work. Now that happens all the time. Pasteur, we know now, fudged a whole bunch of his data. He stole it from one of the guys he was working with. So the adage that you will learn in this course, before you leave the end of this semester, you will learn to trust no one. Okay? Trust no one. Did you wash your hands? Sure I did. Okay? So that pimply-faced little kid that just went in the bathroom at the 7-Eleven there and is coming out and is going to then come and give you your, Krispy Kremes, who's just been in there popping zits and hasn't washed his hands, defecating. And you're going to go, did you wash your hands? Sure I did, lady. Yeah. Trust no one. So we come up with penicillin. When does it show up? And it's the first antibiotic. Salvarsan's not an antibiotic. When does it start to show up for use with humans? In the 1940s. What's going on in the 1940s? World War II. So it starts to be used on soldiers who are wounded. When does it really make its way into your local doctor's office? With rarity, the late 40s, usually by the early 1950s, is when it first shows up in a doctor's office. In what form? We'll talk much more about this later on in the course. As an injectable, because we can't get it through the acids of the stomach without being deteriorated. So that is the first antibiotic. So what was Salvarsan? It's what we call an antimicrobial, because the definition of an antibiotic is that this is a naturally produced compound. Prior to that, though, let's look at one other name. And what I'm trying to get you is to think in terms of the time periods of all of this that's going on. Look at approximately, let's not do him, 1935. So about the same time Fleming is doing his thing, or at least letting us believe he's doing his thing. In 1935, we got this guy by the name of Demock, another German. And he, quite by accident, comes up with what? Sulfa drugs. Antibiotics? No, antimicrobial, because the sulfa drugs are made in the laboratory. And he discovered them quite by accident while he was fiddling with certain types of microbiological stains, and came up with this. They're sulfur-based. 1930s. Where do we see them used in tremendous quantities? Shortly after that, World War II. Saving Private Ryan. If you remember the great film. But what were the medics constantly doing? Somebody gets a huge hole blown in them.
Powder.
The medic comes running up, takes this bag, rips the top off, and dumps this powder into the wound. Sulfa drugs. Very effective. We still use them today? Sure, the sulfonamides, that particular group, we've modified them somewhat, but we still use them today. Okay, so now we've gone to chemotherapy. What else do we have to deal with here? So what we've seen, let's walk through it again. Work with me on this. We see the development of the microscope. We get rid of this idea of spontaneous generation. We go into the germ theory of disease. Then we talk about antisepsis, keeping the buggers that cause disease out. If they do get in, we can treat them. What's the next logical step? Prevention. Exactly. So let's do number 6. And what should we call this? I don't know what to call this. We'll come up with a name. Let's talk about somebody first. Flip the page back over. Who should we do? Let's go 1796. Whoa, shortly after this country was founded. 1796, who shows up? Edward Jenner. There's a long story here, but let's shorten this one up. One of the worst diseases to come through any town, anywhere in Europe or North America, Central America, was something called smallpox. If it didn't kill you, it left you badly pocked. It left these huge depressions in the skin and was maiming. It was a terrible disease to get. But a lot of people died from it. If you know the history of Cincinnati, if you ever go down to the museum center and you go into the historical section, one of the things you see down there is that that when flatboats came down from Pittsburgh or any of the other towns coming down to Cincinnati or to Louisville, and they stopped in Cincinnati, what did they do? There was some kind of doctor or somebody from Cincinnati who went out to meet the flatboat, and they checked everybody on board to make sure they didn't have diseases. And one of the things they were always looking for was pox. Somebody's got the pox. And now, we still joke about that today. We go, pox on you? And a lot of people go, aren't you saying peace on me? No, we're saying pox, not P-A-X, but P-O-X. You running with me? So if somebody says pox on you, it's like saying, drop dead, you know? And if they found somebody who they suspected of having pox, what did they do? Or they either said, go to Louisville and share the wealth, or they burned the boat with the people on it. Okay? Set it afire and pushed it downstream. Because they saw what happened if smallpox showed up. You lost hundreds of people. A bunch of people died out of it. So it was a debilitating disease. Jenner, who is a good doctor working in England, notices the following things. That there is another disease very similar to smallpox called cowpox, which shows up on the teats and udders of cows. And sometimes milkmaids, right, who are young women, prior to being married, had a job. You go out and milk the cows. That's your job. And you're going to make the butter and you're going to do everything else. That they oftentimes would come down with these small little lesions on their fingers. They went away after a period of time, but they picked them up from the cows. But then if smallpox came through the village, that the milkmaids were almost always spared. So this is before germ theory of disease. He's saying there's something in the pus that's coming out of these pox that somehow provides protection for these milkmaids who come up with this infection, and when smallpox comes through, they don't get it. And he went on to kind of do some experimentation and all this kind of stuff, and eventually ended up, and I'm taking a huge jump in terms of all he did because of the time factor, but he took this little kid and actually took pus from smallpox, from a lesion of smallpox, and scraped it into this kid's arm.
Who would volunteer their kid for that?
Oh, kids were experimental animals. They still are. We still use them as experimental animals. We put them on the street and see what happens. You know? We do. I mean, what kind of a society are we? We do that all the time. And the kid came down with mild kind of fever and stuff like that, but never came down with smallpox. And then got exposed to it later on. Normal way that the smallpox organism gets into you is orally. Didn't come down with the infection. He couldn't kind of explain what happened, but he knew that there was this kind of protection that was involved. But why didn't the kid come down with smallpox?
Because he already got it. He got like a little, it's like a vaccination.
Good guess, but you're wrong.
His body built up a resistance to it.
Why?
Because he got a little bit of it.
Okay, he had not been exposed before.
So the antibiotic
It was similar enough.
I couldn't hear it,
It
John.
was similar enough.
Good guess, but the answer was wrong portal of entry. So you got, in this particular case, the live bug, but because it was scratched into the arm, the immune system, which, do these guys know anything about immune system? Nothing, zero. Slow entrance into the system. The immune system had plenty of time to respond to it, came up with a normal immune response, protected you against the disease. What that does, though, is get this whole process going of what we now refer to as immunization by means of vaccine. Look at the word. Spell vaccine for me. Okay? Look at the root of the word.
cow.
Cow. Vaca, Spanish for cow. Or Greek, not Greek. Yeah, it is Greek, cow. Comes out of that same root. So we have vaca because the original studies were with cowpox. So we use the term vaccine today to come up with some means of what? Protecting you even before the infectious bug shows up. There's a whole bunch more examples we can give you out of that one. Somebody mentioned before Salk or Sabin, somebody said something like that. Which one of those guys was in town? We'll talk much more about it later on. Okay? And working with what particular disease? Polio, sure. Right here at Cincinnati Children's. Okay, what else do we have to deal with? We're about done with this story. So is there anything that we need in terms of, there's lots of stuff on here. Look, actually I should have pulled the one out that goes up to 2010. It's close enough. What do you kind of notice is happening from about, well, it's not even on. Look at the last item that shows up in 2003. Small nuclear RNAs discovered. When you hear terms like RNA and DNA, it gets us into what discussion? Genetics. And what we see then, if there is a major sixth region which we could put up here that deals with the role of the microbes, what was this one? What are we going to call this? What do you want to call this?
Vaccine, prevention, prophylaxis.
Ooh, I can't spell that.
Vocabulary.
I know, that's great. I like that. That's good. So it's prevention, right, by means of some type of vaccine. So number 7 would be this idea of genetics. Well, where are we? I mean, what have you heard loads of over the past month again? What happened with your Cheerios?
Cholesterol, they lower your cholesterol.
Oh, shut up. You missed the boat.
Oh, darn.
That was a good guess.
Okay.
What happened with Cheerios?
Right, I was confused.
You lost me with Cheerios.
What?
Yeah, I got nothing.
Are you talking GMOs?
GMOs, exactly right. So if you heard last week or the week before, something like that, General Mills announced that they would no longer be using GMOs in the oat product in their Cheerios.
Oh.
Genetically modified organisms. So the ability to do what? To modify the genetics of an organism for the better of us.
Yeah.
So how did we learn to do that? How did we learn to genetically modify someone? How do we learn to add new genes, to take a gene that doesn't work right or we don't like and get it out of there or turn it off? How do we learn to turn certain genes on? Where does all of that information come from? And how long have we been doing that? About 20 years. About 20 years. How did we know, and now we're at the point where we can do it with humans, right? Okay? And you hear a lot about this idea of gene therapy. You've got a certain metabolic disorder.
Stem cell.
Well, what we're going to do is maybe send some kind of a correct gene down there into that cell or into that tissue that's got these faulty genes, and do a couple of things. Maybe we're going to turn off the gene that's causing the problem and give you a new gene that makes the right protein. Hold on to that stuff. The point is, what have we learned to do? We've learned to manipulate the genomes of organisms and even ourselves. So, what do you know about that? Well, it's tough to go to the grocery store anymore and not buy something that hasn't been genetically modified. It's very hard. Most corn products are all made from genetically modified organisms. And I'm not saying whether that's right or wrong or good or bad. We'll talk more about it later on. The point is, how did we learn how to do that? And it goes back to using basically the yeast of fungi or the bacteria. E. coli is a big hero here. And learning, first of all, how to identify all the genes on the chromosome, which led us into what? The Human Genome Project. So we learned how to do it with E. coli and said, let's use those basic tools that we learned to do that and make the application into humans. So now we've mapped the human genome. And what do we keep finding with the human genome? Markers? We call these markers? What are those? Those are certain genes or set of genes that we know control very specific things. You know, and if this particular marker shows up, this modification of this gene, you're liable to get breast cancer, or uterine cancer, or testicular cancer. But it was the microbes that were the tools that we used to learn the procedures to be able to do that. And where we are right now is in a brave new world, a whole different world in a very short period of time, where we can manipulate and the human genome. And how do we control that? So that gets us into what? An ethical and moral situation that we've got to work our way through. We will hit all this stuff, majority of it, again as we move through the course. I'll come back and make reference to this stuff, to these guys, what's going on. I'll fill in more information as we go through it. So what we did today was this. First of all, we said, what is this course about? We came up with a list of microbes, and we're going to touch on all those that we saw up there sometime during the course. We'll probably spend the majority of time with the bacteria, but we'll hit on all the rest of them. And then we took a kind of a snapshot in the history of microbiology, trying to show some important events that occurred. Were there others? Sure. We didn't get into the discovery of streptomyces, and we could go on and on and on and on about these, the discovery of this bug or that bug. But what we tried to say is that these events occurred. The development of the microscope, essential, so we could see them. When we saw them replicate, and it raised a question. The question was, abiogenesis or biogenesis? Do things come from inanimate things, or do they have to be created, or does life come from life? We talked about Pasteur's role in trying to debunk that with his understanding of fermentation, with the yeast and the bacteria turning it into acetic acid, and then with his swan neck flask trying to get rid of that. We got into the germ theory of disease. What two people in the germ theory of disease really play the most important role? Pasteur again and Koch. Koch is a great story too, and I want you to tell you, don't write this down. But after he was starting to get a fair amount of acclaim, he was well into his 60s and early 70s. He ran away with one of his lab kind of helpers there. She was like 20, and just kind of disappeared off the face of the map. But he died with a smile on his face. And then we got into the idea of antisepsis. If we know these bugs cause disease, how do we keep them out? How do we, even if we create portals of entry, how do we minimize infection? Then we got into the idea, if they do get in, how do we kill them off or keep them from reproducing? The idea of chemotherapy. Then we said, well, we know we're going to be exposed to them sometime or other. Let's find a way of setting up protection right off the bat. The idea of prophylaxis, whoever said that, and that was great. What's some other terms we could use there? Or immune response, I mean, a bunch of things out of that. And the last thing is the whole idea, the concept of genetic engineering. We have used these microbes then to understand and help us to genetically engineer the microbes, loads of animals, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Okay. This is kind of the nature of the lectures in here. Don't expect a boatload of PowerPoints. What you're going to get is kind of a story that goes with it, and then I'll give you some information. I use a fair amount of handouts. I make references to your text a lot to look at this, that, or whatever you find in there. So if this is a little bit foreign to some of you, I'm just asking you to relax right now. Kind of listen to what's going on. And then go back. And let me just spend one kind of a moment here talking about studying and preparing for class. Do not read the text for understanding before you come into the lecture. With me? Don't do that. What I prefer that you do is that you open up the book, and you know from the handout that we're going to deal with chapter 13. I would like for you to open chapter 13, read the introductory paragraph or two, and then just page through the chapter. Okay? Don't try to read it for understanding. We don't cover everything in the book. We don't have enough time to do that. So I will pick out selected things out of each chapter. So what I would urge you to do then is that after we have talked, then to go back to that chapter with a pencil and walk through the chapter again. Now this is the second time through, and go, next to headings. Oh, we talked about that. Check that off. Talked about this. Talked about this. Talked about this, but I didn't understand it. Question mark. Didn't deal with this. We didn't go into this at all, so I'm not going to waste my time trying to understand and read that 15 times. Skip that. Keep going. Find out what we dealt with. Now you've gone through again 2 times. You go back and review to the stuff that you had question marks next to. Now you can talk to your friends, have a study group. You can talk to me in class at the beginning of lecture and say, I got a question mark here. I didn't understand this. We talked about it last time. Let's go through it again. Let's do it. Now you've gone through it 3 times. And so that by the time it comes for the exam, you shouldn't go, I've got 4 chapters to read. But I've got a week to do it. But now it's Sunday night. And you go, I'll be up till 5 in the morning reading this stuff because I haven't read it before. And if you read the last issue of Science, you get it in the medical library. There's the great article there on how the brain learns and retains. And what happens if you try to get things done when you're out of your sleep process. The brain goes, you go ahead, you go through the motions, you go through it all. I ain't remembering any of this. Because I'm going to store it here and there and here and there. And when it comes time for the exam, you aren't going to find it. So you're much better off getting a good night's sleep, first of all, but studying in small groups, 15 groups of time, 15, 20 minutes at a shot. And man, then you've covered a boatload of material. And it's worthwhile stuff because your brain will retain it. It works. Trust me, it works. So try it. Get out of here. I'll see you next week. College fair today, free food.
No, I was a little concerned taking nursing 3 and micro, so well, I did some reading and watch videos and stuff over the break, so it
Puts you ahead of the game.
Exactly.
There you go. It's good to have you in class.
Thank you.
Okay, okay, is Blake's office on air?
Hi, Toots.
Hi.
How have you been?
Good.
Excellent. Anything going on with the kids?
No.
Nope.
Not a lot.